Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and start this webinar. This is the North Pacific LCC Science Management webinar for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where we are going to talk about the Conservation Planning Atlas. It's an introduction and overview, as well as an e-forum, which is a way for us to get real-time feedback from you all, the participants, on how this tool can relate to your work and how it can be improved to better suit your needs. My name is John Minkowski. I'm the coordinator for the North Pacific LCC. I'm here in Lacey, Washington with Mary Mahaffey and Megan Kearney, who also work with the LCC. We have Tom Miewald, who's going to be presenting today. He's down in the Portland office. And then also on the line supporting this meeting is Penny Mavey and Patricia Tillman with Enviro Issues. They're going to help run the e-forum. So let me just start real quickly by, again, thanking you all for making time to see what this Conservation Planning Atlas is about, and to hear a little bit about this product produced by the North Pacific LCC. Just so you all know, we've only invited people from the Fish and Wildlife Service in regions 1, 7, and 8 because we've heard a number of questions and comments about how Fish and Wildlife Service staff can use some of the tools that the LCC is working on and creating. So we've introduced this a couple of times, but we're sort of in a rolling phase where we are presenting the Conservation Planning Atlas, but at the same time we're taking information from you all on how we can add data sets or add features to make it work better for you. The NPLCC covers the coastal temperate rainforest region. It's on your screen along the Pacific Northwest. Some of you may be on the call that are from outside that region because you're interested in what this Conservation Planning Atlas is and does, and we certainly welcome you as well. The North Pacific LCC focuses on developing, coordinating, and disseminating science to inform landscape-scale conservation, with a particular emphasis on climate change and related stressors. We have a number of goals that guide the work this LCC does. A couple of those goals are really related to helping our partners access, use, and share landscape-scale conservation information. And this is something that we heard was a very widely felt need by the steering committee of the LCC, because oftentimes people working on conservation are stymied because it's difficult to access data and information due to political boundaries, institutional boundaries, information gaps, data inconsistencies, and access capabilities. So to help address this challenge, we set about creating this online information discovery, access, and management platform, which we're calling the CPA, Conservation Planning Atlas. And the point of today is to present that to you and also hear information and hear feedback from you on ways that we can improve this. So if you can see, the agenda for today is basically the introduction from me, which I just presented. We will, in a few moments, turn over to Penny Mavey, who will talk about how to use the meeting sphere function, and also that will give you a preview of the kinds of questions that we're going to ask you at the end. So when you hear Tom make his presentation, you'll be primed a little bit on some of the questions that we're going to ask you for feedback on regarding how to improve this. Then Tom will give a presentation of the CPA, the content, the data set, the features, and he'll take some questions. And then we want to shift into the last phase, which is allowing you to provide, through your desktop, different ways that we can improve this tool over time. So
okay, well, thanks, John, and thanks, Penny. And my name's Tom Miewald. I'm the Conservation Data Coordinator for the North Pacific LCC. I also work as a GIS analyst, landscape ecologist for refuges as well, and work on data management with in Region 1 in Portland here. And I'm excited to talk with you all as the Fish and Wildlife Service about the North Pacific LCC Conservation Planning Atlas and Data Management System that we've been furiously working on for the past couple of years. And I want to acknowledge a few people, too, before going any further, that have helped support the development of the CPA. One is Madeline Steele, who has helped with populating data, as well as Aaron Butts. I also want to acknowledge Brendan Ward and Tasha Commandant from Database or Conservation Biology Institute, who have been great working with them in getting this database and site up and running. So I'll start with that. The agenda is to go through kind of a rationale for why are we doing this and how we got to this stage. So a little bit of history, and then go into the content. What do you see on the the Conservation Planning Atlas, what it is, and then I'll walk through some examples of how this might be useful for the Fish and Wildlife Service. And this is really, we're kind of in version 1.0 mode for the Conservation Planning Atlas, so we really want to think and get people engaged within the service on how can we use this to, one, manage data, to work collaboratively amongst programs across distributed geographies, working with our partners on data and information. This is it's such a big part of doing landscape scale planning, design, SHC, call it what you will. Data and information plays a key role, and that's really where the LCCs can shine in making information data accessible for people. So I think that covered part of the need there, but this is seen, as John has mentioned, that this is a real role for the LCCs and the North Pacific LCC, and it's in early science planning with our group of partners. This was a commonly articulated role that the LCCs could play. We really need to look at data and information that transcends subject matter, organization, and boundaries, jurisdictional boundaries. The North Pacific LCC covers several states and also a different country. So there's a lot of challenges in getting data together and integrated in a common platform, and that's what we've been working on. So there's been a commonly articulated role for the LCC to play in inventorying data. What's out there? There's a lot of information and data out there in the Pacific Northwest and the coastal temperate rainforest. We're blessed with having a lot of data. We're not data poor in many ways, but there's a lot of coordination that could go around making data more accessible. Synthesizing data, putting data together in ways that we can better understand the state of the knowledge on certain topics. Standardizing data has also been a commonly articulated role. So a little bit on the history and evolution. Back in 2011, an ad hoc data management team was formed with a few people, and we looked at all the different data management systems out there, knowing that we wanted to adopt one for several reasons, and I'll talk about those a bit later. And so we did an inventory of different data management systems. There's a lot out there in 2011, and it seems like in the past 3 years, it's hard to go another week without seeing another, a different data portal of some sort that's been developed out there. So what we wanted to do was develop something that, didn't, recreate the wheel. So as part of that, we identified ScienceBase and LC-MAP, which I'll talk about very briefly, but this is kind of a core part of the data management system. And Databasin has 2 existing systems to meet our needs. And then we conducted, last year, a series of focus group workshops across the geography of the LCC, going from Portland, Seattle, to Vancouver, to Juneau, Vancouver, BC, to assess needs and appropriate niche of the LCC and data. So that focus group project that lasted a good 6 months really helped give us a better handle on what the needs were. I think that's such a critical part before you start developing something for people. You really try to take the pulse of what people want and need. So that's what we put a lot of time in initial homework that really helped out and paid off to develop the site rather quickly. So I wanted to better understand the needs, the tasks, and the functions and capabilities that stakeholders across the LCCs might find useful, and I think there was quite a number of Fish and Wildlife Service employees that were engaged in that. So thanks for the feedback. So the highest initial priorities that came out through that focus group process was we need a tool that will help us find and access information. We need to focus on landscape scale information. That's really what the LCC is about. We're not going to be collecting data about a small watershed in coastal California or Washington or something, but what are the landscape scale data sets out there that we can bring together? Having a metadata system that people can understand the quality of the data, how it was made, was it peer reviewed, and strategic positioning within the expanding world of online portals. This is important because, as I said, there's a lot of different portals out there. There's a lot of different choices. So how do we develop a tool that can either harvest from those or not duplicate effort? And then finally, it's supporting the practitioner community. And when I think of that, I think of groups and communities and stakeholder collaboratives that are engaged in landscape scale planning or design. That would be a high priority. So just to briefly, I'll walk through this kind of conceptual diagram really quickly about, this is kind of how the data management system of the North Pacific LCC kind of can be schematically visualized. At the base level is the data, the metadata, and the information, all based upon the NPLCC data management standards that we're developing. The next layer up is this layer of the management layer of that we're using Science Space and LC Map, and if you're a data wonk, you would know what that means. But I'm not going to go into too much detail on that right now and focus more on really the gateway layer, and that's what we're talking about here. And this is where the Conservation Planning Atlas is coming together as a way of taking the data that the North Pacific LCC has produced or inventoried and getting it out there through this gateway. The great thing about this management layer that we've developed is that other services can consume that data too. It doesn't have to just be the CPA, but the CPA is, the Conservation Planning Atlas is our primary way to get information out, to visualize and to look at. And the other great thing too about the CPA is that it can bring together data from different data publishers, and I'll try to give an example of that working with some ECOS data that the Fish and Wildlife Service has developed. So we don't want to copy data from one platform and put it on ours. We want to be able to use the web mapping services and the data services that are out there and proliferating these days into this CPA without duplicating data. And then, the final place that this is going is the conservation community. The folks on this phone is, how can this tool help you meet some of the needs and goals that you have? So there's a lot of data out there in the North Pacific. So what is the criteria for including into the Conservation Planning Atlas? First and foremost, this tool is a tool to get the data produced by the North Pacific out there to the broader world. We funded a lot of information and data products that are now coming online. So we want to have a tool that, that data doesn't get lost, and then in perpetuity that data can be found, and those analyses and products that we've invested our resources in can be quickly and easily consumed by people to use it. We're focused on consistent data sets across the North Pacific LCC. That's a high priority. High-quality landscape scale data is another one. Synthesizing and bringing together data, and I think this will all make more sense once I start digging into the CPA with you all. Adding value to data sets, for example, there's a lot of data out there that are zipped files of ASCII, blocks of data that aren't easily accessible. So how can we play a role in getting that data, out of a less user-friendly format and into a format that is more readily usable by a community of users? And then finally is orphan data. That would be poor, homeless pixels and polygons that are out there that maybe don't have a home. For example, a recent master's thesis on estuary threats assessment across British Columbia, and I'll show that later, didn't really have a home, and that data could just sit there and wither away. And so what we want to do is bring that data into a place that can be accessed. So I guess the heart of this talk is how can we make this tool useful for the Fish and Wildlife Service? And that's really a high priority for the LCC. And I'll walk through a few ideas that I've ginned up, but it would be great to hear ideas from you. So I'll walk through a few case studies of looking at conservation opportunities and priorities, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service interests in climate change, where conservation is occurring on the landscape, also understanding climate change models. We'll talk a little bit about collaborative workspaces that we have to do landscape planning. Some of the data dissemination services. If you don't have a place to put your data, this could be a good place to make that data accessible to you. I'll talk a little bit about the protected areas and climate change, and also some of the data inventory and search tools on the CPA. So with that, I'll go straight into it here. So if you go to nplcc.databasin.org. This takes you to the landing page of the Conservation Planning Atlas, and I'll briefly walk through a high-level overview of some of the features. There's opportunities to take a tour and learn more about it online, so I won't spend a whole lot of time going through some of the basic functionality. And I'll focus mostly on this section down here and walk through the three different panels, I suppose, of products, and then I'll walk through a few examples of data that I've pulled together for this presentation to give you an example of how the CPA works. So you can get started here and take a tour. You can browse, and this gives you a way to get into the featured data sets and guides and case studies that I'll talk about in a bit. This is really more for the management side of creating a map or data. I'll talk a little about the communities that we've developed and some of the other parts of this. So starting from the right-hand side of the screen, if you click on here, you'll basically get a map that shows the North Pacific LCC and the study area, or the area that we call the North Pacific LCC that goes from Northern California all the way up to Anchorage, Alaska. And so this really just provides a tool so that you can visualize the North Pacific LCC landscape from a very broad scale. And right now you can see the CPA is loading data right now. It goes rather quickly, about the same time that it takes to load a ArcGIS MXD file, if you're familiar with that. And with that, you can start to visualize. You can zoom in and out. You can acquire and identify aspects of the information that are on there, and do all the things that you might expect to do in a GIS setting. So this is like basically having a desktop GIS without having to go through the Esri products and having a lot of information and data at your disposal. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot more time on there other than to show that this is a way to visualize the North Pacific LCC. The central gallery here, what we're calling featured galleries, is really where we are highlighting the projects that the North Pacific LCC has funded and developed over the years. And so, for example, if you go here, the North Pacific Forest Landscape Connectivity Project, there's a number of different data sets that were produced looking at connectivity across, forest connectivity across the whole region. And if you click on that, it will take you to a map. And I have this loaded up here. Again, you can zoom in and start to visualize connectivity across the region. So basically, you could click on a data set, learn more about it with all the metadata tools that are associated with it. All you want about the data. You can download the information and data as well, right there, and visualize the data. If you don't want to go through the process of downloading it, then and just visualize it here in this tool and start to interact with the data and information there. So basically, this is our way of getting the projects that we've funded out there to you all in a way that's easy to digest. You don't need a GIS analyst to walk you through the use of these products. We're trying to make these data sets available in several different ways. I'll now talk a little bit about the far left section here, and this is what we're calling galleries. And I'm not going to walk through each of the data sets, but other than to say that there's about 200 different data sets that we've pulled together that we thought were of high value to the conservation community engaged in landscape-scale conservation planning. And I'll walk through some basic functionality, but leave the detailed understanding of all the different data sets in here to you. So, for example, first of all, these galleries are focused around the 5 different North Pacific LCC science priorities: marine resources, freshwater resources, and of course, climate change is a big one, and anadromous resources. So if you click into a gallery, you'll notice that there's a little something about the data you'll find in here. It provides a few different links to other data portals that you might find of use. On the front, or the top of each of the gallery contents, this is where you really start getting into the bulk of the data that we've pulled together on here. You'll find guides and case studies that we've pulled together. For example, this one is on sea level rise. So this will give you some examples of the use of geospatial data and information to address sea level rise. Again, this is one of the priorities. And then it will give you links to explore related items related to sea level rise, different sea level rise models that are out there, and products such as that. And from here, there's a number of different data sets that we've pulled together. Coastal data, for example, I'll bring up the British Columbia Estuary Threats Assessment that was done by a researcher in British Columbia. Didn't have a home for the data, so we're putting that data here on our Conservation Planning Atlas so that people can start to use that information. Provides you with metadata, and then you can open it and start to interact with information and data. Under each of these galleries as well, there's something called external resources. So one of the things that we've done, and a few people have helped me with the development of a data inventory. Basically, we've inventoried about 1,000 different data sets, GIS data layers across the North Pacific LCC. Not all that data has of it that are interactive in database, and they may be zipped folders, or they could be links to data, or they could be data sets on different servers. So this will provide a portal to that information and data. For example, this will take you to data sets related to coastal and marine resources that aren't necessarily as data sets in the CPA, but they're data sets that exist, and it links you to a metadata record for that data set, which then you can go download the data and find it. So that was part of a data inventory that we did. So you'll find that component as well on the Conservation Planning Atlas. So a number of freshwater resources, you'll find a lot of different data sets, again, related to condition and impacts. We have a lot of data related to dams. We have the National Fish Habitat Action Plan data, web mapping services encompassed in here, splash dams, log drives, information that gets you at condition, glacier data, hydrography, and other prioritizations that have been done across the region. So without going through each one of the galleries in a lot of detail, I'll walk through a few more. Climate change. I'll show this one because this has a value-added product that we've worked with David Pott on developing, climate trends and projections information that he's pulled together that you can start to visualize and read his recommendations on using climate change information data for planning, as well as links to relevant data sets that are talked about. There's a lot of climate change data that we've pulled together. For example, the climate projections for Western North America data set. This is one of those instances where we've added a lot of value to the different data that is out there. Again, these are data sets that are sitting as ASCII files, not directly downloadable and viewable. They're downloadable, but you can't really view them without having a GIS expert there. But this provides a way to interact with that data and information for a number of different climate models across the whole North Pacific LCC region. So, for example, here you can bring up the data for climate change projections there. Let's see. I'll walk through a few more examples here of what you'll find in the gallery. Anadromous resources. There's a lot of data that we've gotten from the Wild Salmon Center, who works across the whole North Pacific region in doing habitat assessments for salmon and abundance estimates as well. So they didn't have a home for the data, and so we worked with them to get the data on our site, so now the data can be distributed and found by others. I'll throw up another example of a Pacific lamprey data that was developed by our CRFPO office here. This was an assessment that was done. I think this is a good example of a data set that was produced by the Fish and Wildlife Service and maybe didn't have a web mapping component to get that information and data out there. So once this data is on the atlas, there's a lot of people that can start to interact with the data, and I'll just bring up a few examples of how we can start to look at this data once it's in the Conservation Planning Atlas. So here's the lamprey data, and now we can start to do some kind of mashups with other data sets that are on the Conservation Planning Atlas. If we're interested in looking at climate change, impacts on some of these areas, we can just simply overlay some data sets that are already on the Conservation Planning Atlas. For example, right now I'm bringing up the changes in stream flow metric database that was developed by the Forest Service, and again, it was not available online except as a shapefile that you had to download. Now it's a web mapping service, and you can start to see areas in red are areas where there's projected to be more less stream flow across the area. So you can start to look at the lamprey information data, the assessment data that's in the background here. These are watersheds for the different lamprey rankings, and you can start to look at that. We're also bringing in the Norwest Project database that looks at stream temperature changes over the next 40 to 60 years, and that's some of Dan Isaac's work that he's developed. This is already an existing web mapping service that's out there. So we can start to bring that data up. Again, areas in red are areas that have higher projected change or temperatures, and you can start to interact and look at the lamprey data within the lens of climate change. So that's just an example of how you can start to bring different data sets together in the Conservation Planning Atlas. Here I'll show an example, again, related to climate change, as that's one of the main focuses of the North Pacific LCC. Here we have wildlife refuges across the region, and Region 1, and apologies for the Region 1-centric look at this. I'll try to show a few different data sets that go up in Alaska as well. But it's just an example of what you could do in other geographies as well once you have the CPA together. So here we have the wildlife refuge system in Region 1. And you can start to very easily bring together some different climate change data sets that have been produced. For example, this one showing vegetation instability across the area. Areas in red indicate places where the models have disagreement on the vegetation type that's found there, leading to some evidence that there might be changes in vegetation structure or composition. With blue being less. So you can start to, just on a very coarse level, start to look at the refuge system within the context of different climate change models that are out there. The fact that there's so much different climate change data that's coming online now really gives us an opportunity to start to look at these data sets in all the different dimensions that they're showing results. This one's showing velocity of climate change across Western North America. And then you can also start to bring in some of the climate change models that we've developed for different bird species across the North Pacific geography as well. Here's olive-sided flycatcher future density models that have been developed. So wildlife refuge managers can start to look at some of the data sets that are out there and start to think about how things may be changing with climate change. Will there be different distributions for this species of concern? Will it go out of the area, or is it expected to become part of the suite of species that are that you're managing for? You can also start to bring in different data sets as well. For example, right now I'm going to also bring in the critical habitat data, and you can start to look at critical habitat data within the lens of climate change as well. And this is bringing data from ECOS, actually. This is not a data set that we've pulled together and looked at separately, or downloaded separately and then uploaded again. So an example of how we can start looking at Fish and Wildlife Service interests or priorities within the lens of some of the data sets that the North Pacific and others are developing, particularly in terms of climate change. Now I'll go through another example in this part of the geography of the North Pacific. So here we have it's basically a mashup of different conservation priority areas within the North Pacific LCC, and then I'll start to overlay some Fish and Wildlife Service related data on there. So the great thing about Databasin is that there's this expanse of information and data out there that we can start to pull from. And so here I'm bringing together important bird areas from Washington and Oregon, Alaska as well, TNC portfolio plans, priority landbird wetland areas, Oregon conservation opportunity areas, wild salmon strongholds, and then you can start to see how the conservation landscape is changing, or how people are prioritizing the conservation landscape in the region or any region that you're in. And you start to get quite a few different data sets out there, and it starts to get a bit of a mess, but you can start to see some patterns and trends of different conservation priorities out there. Right now I'm bringing up partners for fish and wildlife focus areas that we have, and also coastal program focus areas as well. Another thing that I'll throw on top of this is information from TAILS, which is an ECOS database that is, we're able to harvest that information right from the database, and it brings it on there as a web mapping service. So we can start to see how some of the work that we're doing on the landscape starts to correlate with other priority areas that we're starting to look at. So there's a lot, these are just ideas of how we can start to bring together information and data in a web mapping component that is relatively easy to use. And then I'll just briefly go through this example here of, this is data that we've pulled together again from GeoFin, the barriers database, and also TAILS as well. So this was kind of an example of how we can start to pull in together data that's related to the Fish and Wildlife Service within the Conservation Planning Atlas. And the great thing about this, the CPA, is that you can have this whole world of data, not only from the North Pacific CPA, but the whole database and catalog as well of thousands of data sets. I'll walk through one last example here before we start to go into the interactive part. And so one of the parts, components of the CPA is this area for communities. And here you can go to groups, and there's a number of different groups that are starting to form. There's a Transboundary Coastal Rainforest group that we're pulling together information for the BC-Alaska transboundary area. We have the Cascadia Partner Forum that's engaged in a landscape conservation design process that they're actively using for bringing together information and data for a number of different priorities. And then what I'll focus on in terms of Fish and Wildlife Service is the Willamette Valley Conservation Assessment that some colleagues are working on here in refuges. And this is a really great way to bring together a lot of information and share it with a group of stakeholders that are distributed across the geography. And just to give you an example of all the different data sets that are out there, these are meant to be data sets that can be reviewed by this group. This red lock that you see on there means that only certain people have access to that. So we want to have some privacy behind the information. There might be some sensitive information. They're draft results. We don't want them to go public. So this provides a level of security to the data that we're putting out there. And just to give you an example of that, of what you can start to do and work with something that Madeline Steele has developed is a map of different conservation priority areas that we're defining, as well as different data sets that helped inform that prioritization as well. So it provides an interactive tool that people can actually start to draw and edit some of the data sets that are on there as well. So yeah, that in a nutshell goes through the Conservation Planning Atlas. There's a lot to it, and we hope to build and grow this system as well. And I hope to engage people on this call in working with the North Pacific LCC on developing this tool to meet the goals and objectives that you'd like to meet across the landscape in terms of information, data, conservation planning. And so with that, I think I will pass it back to Penny.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Tom. Wow, fascinating stuff. Great.
Great. Thank you very much. Tom, thanks for the great presentation. Thanks for your help, Penny and Tricia as well. And thank you all for joining. We're really trying hard to develop this tool and create it in such a way that actually meets the needs over time of the conservation partners that we have in the region, and that certainly includes Fish and Wildlife Service, because they do a lot to support the NPLCC. We want to make sure we're providing good results and added value in return. So please feel free to contact Tom. If you have questions about this or want additional help on the CPA, feel free to contact me or any of the staff here at the NPLCC via our website, if there's anything else that you have interest in or more that you want to know about the LCC. So thank you all again for joining. We're going to turn off the webinar. Encourage you to stay on the meeting sphere and add more comments over lunchtime if you have any more thoughts, and we'll look forward to hearing from any of you that want to have follow-up conversations. Thanks again, and have a great afternoon.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.